I think Conor McGregor was his most dominant when he was a featherweight. Right? He was undefeated in the UFC as a featherweight. We saw him beat Dennis Silver. We saw him beat Max Holloway. We saw him beat Dustin Poirier. The list goes on. We saw him beat Jose Aldo. My problem is Conor McGregor, when he went up in weight, he didn't look like the same Conor McGregor. He didn't look like his same dominant self. He had a little bit of trouble when the guys were still standing in front of him and taking those punches. Sure, he might have dropped them, but they were still getting back up. They were still walking towards him, and they still were hitting him with some of their best shots. So one can make the argument that Conor McGregor hasn't been dominant since he's been a featherweight. He never defended the lightweight belt because he left. Conor went and boxed Floyd Mayweather and got carried to a 10th round loss. Conor comes back. He beats Khabib Nurmagomedov. He was offered that fight 4 times, turned it down 4 times. And then we had the incident with Artem Lobov, and you guys know the story. The fight happens after Conor throws a dollar through the bus. At that point, his back was against the wall. Hence is why he said in the fight, it's only business. He didn't want the fight. Conor never wanted the fight. The same reason why Ronda Rousey never wanted the Chris Cyborg fight. These fighters get built up and get branded by the UFC. And then when hits the fan, they're forced to show their true colors. It happens. We've seen it happen time and time and time again. So I said all that about Conor McGregor to say what? Conor was his most dominant when he was a featherweight. He was undefeated in the UFC. Since he's been the lightweight, his record is 2-2. He has a TKO victory over Eddie Alvarez when he won the lightweight belt. He beat Nate Diaz in a decision victory. He lost to Nate Diaz by submission. He lost to Khabib by submission as well. So one can make the argument, right? There are no compelling fights that make sense for Conor McGregor, at least for me. I don't think there's a fight that makes sense for Conor McGregor right now that I see him winning easily. Right? Because right now you have to rebrand him. Conor McGregor cannot step back in the UFC with a loss, because if he does, his career's over. Let's be blunt about it. If Conor McGregor suffers another loss in the UFC, his career is over. He will always be a draw. But as far as him beating the top contenders and earning these title shots, it's not happening. Let me explain. You probably are looking at me like, what are you talking about? Conor could beat a lot of guys, but do the fights make sense? Conor can beat a lot of guys probably now still. That left hand is dangerous. As long as Conor has that left on him, I give him a puncher's chance against anybody. But I'm going to be honest with you. You talk about the featherweight division. Who's Conor? What fights down to the featherweight make sense? Brian Ortega? Is Conor winning that easily? I don't know. Max Holloway rematch? Is he winning that easily? I don't know. Hell, I'll go even as far as to say if Conor fights Jose Aldo, right? I mean, we're talking about a guy who was undefeated for 10 years. Conor comes in, knocks him out. All the while, I think Conor wins that fight again. Can you confidently say Conor McGregor can go 3 rounds with Jose Aldo? I think Conor can win the fight, but I think Conor will be a little discouraged if he hits Jose Aldo with that same shot and Jose Aldo doesn't drop. I think it's an interesting argument. Jose Aldo's, by the way, called for that fight too. Hasn't heard back yet. Then we can fast forward to the lightweight division, right? Conor can fight Khabib Nurmagomedov again, although I don't see that fight going any differently. I think the fight actually ends worse. I think Khabib beats him. What about Conor versus Tony Ferguson? Can Conor beat Tony Ferguson? I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. Can Conor beat Nate Diaz? He hasn't knocked the guy out. Dude submitted him. Can Conor beat Anthony Pettis? Who knows? It's a tough fight. Okay. Conor, those are tough fights down there. What about Conor moving up to welterweight, right? He's naturally a big guy. What if Conor fights Jorge Masvidal? Who's picking Conor to beat Jorge Masvidal? I'll wait. I'm not. Maybe Conor versus Tyron Woodley. They've had a lot of back and forth. I'm not picking Conor to win that fight. Understand what I'm saying, guys? It's very difficult right now for Conor to step back into the UFC after all this time away from the game and think he's just going to be some dominant guy again. It's an interesting discussion that nobody's talking about. But I say that all that to say, anytime Conor McGregor steps in the octagon, it will put butts to seats. It will put eyes to the TV. But it's interesting. Conor McGregor stepping back in the UFC is interesting. There aren't a lot of fights. I'll keep saying it. There aren't a lot of fights out there for Conor McGregor. Winnable fights. Easily winnable fights out there for Conor McGregor in the UFC right now. That makes sense. There aren't. You can put him up against a jobber all day. Even Donald Cerrone. I don't know if I'm picking Conor to win that fight. I don't think he could beat the Cowboy. Not easily. So what's next for Conor McGregor? Well, I'll tell you what the smart thing for Conor to do is. If we're looking for a fight that can give him a challenge, all the while preserving some dignity, I think him versus the Nate Diaz, I think the Nate Diaz trilogy fight makes the most sense. I really do. I think Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor trilogy fight makes the most sense. It's the only fight right now that's marketable for Conor, that you can put butts to seats and eyes to the TV and make people think that this guy has a solid chance at winning. All the while, that's even pushing it. But there you go. People aren't going to like it, but the proof is in the pudding. Conor is who he is. The UFC built this man. And I'm signing off.